You must stay at home. Stay at home.
Hello, and welcome to Lockdown, hosted by Steve Bomford with Mike Davis-Marks. Our armed forces operate in challenging environments. Week by week, we'll explore what we can learn from their experiences.
Well, Steve, I hear you've got a very good and old mucker of mine who has done some extraordinary things in her life.
I have indeed, and I wasn't able to get any decent gossip out of her either. Very, very frustrating. I'm trying to pump these people for some information about you. But yes, Pam Heeley, I think you know her well.
I do, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say.
So Pam, first of all, I would like to say thank you very much for agreeing to come on the podcast. It's Mike that's introduced you to me, and I know we've had our trials and tribulations in sorting this out. You're a very busy lady by the sounds of things.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's my pleasure, complete pleasure. I've known Mike many years, so I'll do whatever I can to help him.
To help him, that's great. But also I want any gossip you've got about Mike. I'm a bit short on, things that I can... A bit of leverage would be really handy, because it sounds like you know him quite well.
Yeah, I'll give it some thought.
Okay. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about your time in the Royal Navy.
Okay, so I really liked the idea of joining the Navy. I was born and brought up in the Midlands, in a place called Lichfield, which is north of Birmingham. And I really liked joining the Royal Navy because it seemed very glamorous if you only go to the sea for 2 weeks a year. So I thought that would be fun. And I remember going into the careers office in Birmingham and them saying to me, oh, no, if you want to join and you can be an officer, then you should go to university. So, off you go to university, and then you can still apply. Well, I was thinking of, leaving school with A-levels and joining the Navy, which I think was very good advice. I went off to Exeter. I had a great time and thought again about the Navy in the latter year of university. And I remember somebody saying, well, you can't join the Navy because you're a bit crazy. And the Navy is a very disciplined service. Oh yeah. And anyway, so then some boyfriend type said, I bet you £5 you won't make it through basic training. Okay. So that is a great, when things get hard, that was, he wasn't going to win. Anyway, so I passed my Admiralty interview board and went to HMS Dauntless, as it was then, which was basic training for all ranks, because all WREN officers did time as on the lower deck. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. Didn't really like getting up at 5 a.m. and doing kit musters and running around outside in January in the cold. But apart from that, it was great. So I enjoyed that. Got through basic training, went to Dartmouth about 6 months later, enjoyed that, and really had, I was very lucky, and I had a really enjoyable time as a WREN officer, and did lots of useful things. I went into communications, so I did lots of crypto. That was one of my sort of babies. Spent a lot of time I worked in Faslane, so quite interesting to see Vigil, the television program recently, see what was...
I'm gonna have to interrupt you there. What did you think of Vigil? Because I know Mike's got some strong opinions on this.
Yeah, I thought it was, obviously it's a drama. So, it was dramatic, and therefore the sets weren't, there's a lot more space on the sets and so on. And actually, one could say it was a bit over dramatic. However, I think actually in terms of the sort of life that people lead on submarines, where they go away for long periods of time, I think the general public don't know that.
Yeah.
So it probably educated people who perhaps didn't know anything about submariners to some extent. Now, obviously, it's a drama, and you could pick a lot of faults in it. But I think it was, as an educational piece, starting from nothing, no knowledge, it was, certainly interesting. There's certainly quite a few of people I talked to seem to have really enjoyed it. I say it was over dramatic in my view, but
I think it's a good point, isn't it? This idea that you can't surface for very good reasons. And obviously it's the nuclear deterrent in that case, but also the impact that has on people in terms of, isolation and separation from families.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I spent, 2.5 years in Faslane and saw guys come and go from these submarines. And, they were, and the lifestyle they had to lead and the lifestyle their families had to leave. Was quite interesting, really. Anyway, so I thought I quite enjoyed Faslane, but it did rain a lot. That was the kind of downside, I would say. But I was very much involved in the secret communications. Spent a lot of time going to the likes of Cheltenham, and it was, all very interesting things to be involved in. But having got married in, about 5 or 6 years into my career, the rules then were, if you had children, you were out and you couldn't come back. So my husband, who was Navy, and I decided that although we didn't want children straight away, that would be a long-term plan. So I left the WRENs in order to establish a career outside without where I could go back to work if I wanted to, or if it was necessary.
Can I ask, how did you feel about the idea of having to leave the Navy? Because you said you wanted to join it because it was glamorous, and you've obviously you've done some interesting stuff. How did you feel about that? Because obviously times have changed now, haven't they?
Yeah, no, I thought it was atrocious. And what we used to do because I was a communications officer, we always had very big divisions. Okay, or I always had very big divisions. And so you might have a division of, particularly when I was in Faslane, my immediate boss was ill, so I ended up running the Faslane Communications Centre for about 6 months on my own as a baby lieutenant. And, there's 140 people, over half of them were women. And if they become pregnant, there was no maternity outfit. So they can only work until they don't fit in their uniform. So we had a wardrobe with different size skirts. Okay, so people you can do that for until the junior 8s, because the skirts are, there's quite a lot of junior 8s. So you'll always choose, circulating the same skirts. But for officers, you couldn't do that. Anyway, so we had and if you didn't work to whatever week it was, then you couldn't get statutory maternity pay. So the aim was always to circulate the skirts until no skirt would fit them, and then maybe they wouldn't go out on divisions. There's always somebody who had to be left behind to not be on divisions, all this sort of stuff. So by clever, not breaking the rules, but just being sensible planning, you could ensure that most of the girls could work up until the time they had to work in order to claim state benefit.
Wow.
So it was literally a revolving door of skirts in order to qualify. Crikey.
A big wardrobe. Big wardrobe of skirts. And the chief WREN would be, officer in charge of skirts, so to speak. So it was very different. I mean, it was ridiculous, completely ridiculous, but that's how it was. And so anyway, that didn't really apply to officers. And we had so I ended up leaving so that I could get myself established in a career outside. But I didn't feel I quite got rid of the naval bug. So I joined the Naval Reserve straight away and didn't want to go into something which I'd been doing in the regular service, because I'd had quite high clearances and been in lots of interesting conversations. And I felt that, as a whole, then reservists weren't doing that sort of work. So I decided to do something completely different and went really from gamekeeper to poacher and went into the media operations branch. And so, and there at that point, that was a fairly new branch. It was set up after the Falkland Islands conflict. They wanted ex-Navy people who could learn about the media, as opposed to media people who could learn about the Navy. And so they wanted ex-Navy people who had a sort of marketing or PR or comms job in their main job. And I joined that and was very happy doing that actually for many years.
That's a heck of a change, isn't it? From sort of popping down to GCHQ to PR and comms.
I know. Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. I had all sorts of, highlights and lowlights. I remember, I suppose, fairly soon after I left the Navy, we moved to Scotland, and the Lockerbie Air Disaster happened. So I phoned up Petrivi and said, "Hello, can I speak to the only PR person that was there?" And said, "Can I join?" Or there's actually two of them, and civilians. And they said, "Well, actually, they're really busy. The wait time's an hour and a half." So I said, "Well, I'm phoning up to offer to come in to help." So that's what I did. So we went from two people trying to answer the questions of the world media to three, which at least gave one person the opportunity to go into the Admiral's brief and hear what was happening.
Yeah. So
to hear, firsthand before it was released that the only option for what had happened to this aircraft was a bomb on board was pretty shocking, to be honest. And I do remember that moment as everyone in the ops room just stood there and went, "Oh God," and a few expletives.
Yeah.
And had some sort of, I remember the Secretary of State's wife got on the phone, was put through to me. So I'm having a conversation with the Secretary of State's wife, and who had lost him. He was obviously somewhere in transit. And this was really pre-good mobile phones. So I wasn't really quite sure where he was. So anyway, I thought, I'll put him onto the Admiral. I'm sure the Admiral would like to speak to her. And so he was able to tell her what he was doing and where he was going and where he thought, he was unlikely to be home that night, sort of thing. So it was very shocking, but a good thing to have, done, really.
I think one of the things I find fascinating about all these podcast episodes I've done is the amount of change that's happened, not just in the services, but in life in general. Reliable mobile phones. Where's the minister? I mean, it's just unheard of now, isn't it?
No,
it just wouldn't be able to function if it was like that.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was. Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of like how it was.
So, are you still in the reserves? Have you, or you?
No, I did. I did in uniform something like 29 years, and I left in 2010. So I did various things in the reserves. I was lucky enough to go to the handover of Hong Kong, and which was fascinating. Actually, you really felt you were touching you were there at a time of world history.
Yeah.
And on the practical level, it rained a lot. So, I certainly had 3 changes of uniform in less than 24 hours. I got soaked to the skin. It was very wet. But it was fascinating to be at something like that. And then I did a number of sort of recalls to service and so on. But meantime, I'd had these children who were small, and actually the rules changed so that had I stayed in the Navy and not left, I probably would have been able to have had the gone back to work after having children, and I would have had a maternity outfit because the uniform was created. Anyway, there was no point thinking, oh, what if? The decision was made in good with good faith, really, I suppose. And so we had the children, which was great, and I continued to do a whole lot of reserve, all sorts of various different things. But one of the things which is certainly a highlight was working on the Bicentennial of the Battle of Trafalgar, and I was very lucky to be asked to do that project. I'd done a number of events as such prior to that, and a couple of international festival of the seas, and also a James Bond premiere, which sounds a bit ridiculous, but somehow there was a naval charity which needed the film charity needed to raise money in order so that when ships and submarines went to sea, they had CDs, as they were then, or videos or whatever it was, for film nights. And the naval charity had run out of money, and so I was asked if there was going to be a James Bond, I think Die Another Day, I think it was, premiere. So regional premiere in Portsmouth. And I think the original idea was to have the show in one screen in Portsmouth, and then have a sort of drinks do on board HMS Victory immediately before that. And the Prince of Wales was attending, and it was all going to be very nice. So I sort of said, well, I think we ought to make a bit more of it. So we ended up 6 weeks later having a sort of little show. So we had fictitious people acting as James Bond. We borrowed a Aston Martin from the local Aston Martin dealer, which I think Tiffany Dell drove. We had we were selling the tickets to sit in the same cinema, in the same screen as Prince of Wales for X. If you were going to the drinks do on Victory before, it was, I don't know, several times X. But if you just wanted to go to the party and see the screen earlier and to be part of the melee around the cinema and maybe see the odd celebrity, it was half X. Anyway, so we ended up raising quite a lot of money in an evening. And the then First Sea Lord was meant to be coming and was hosting with the hosting thing in Victory and hosting the Prince of Wales. And the then Commander-in-Chief was sort of coming down to see the show and missing the Victory bit and then going into the cinema. Anyway, so we had this bizarre situation where Prince of Wales was due any second down on the waterfront. I'm talking to the Commander-in-Chief, and I just saw out of my right eye that the First Sea Lord had turned up, and the Hampshire police were moving his car on because he shouldn't have been there because he wasn't scheduled. So I said to the Admiral, "Why don't you just look over here, sir?" Pointed him in the other direction. He said, "Why am I looking that way?" And I said, "Because if you look the other way, you will see First Sea Lord being moved on by the police cars, by police, Hampshire police. And my guess is both you and I should be doing something about it if that's the case. So if we look the other way, we haven't seen it." He said, "Very good call, Healy." First Sea Lord, deal with that. Anyway, so First Sea Lord got out of his car moved really quickly. He came to join us, and all was fine and dandy. But it was quite an amusing moment. Anyway, so the Prince of Wales appeared. Lots of people were delighted, and it was it was live on the regional television, and a lot of money was raised. So with having an events background, I think, having done a number of events, I ended up doing the comms for the Bicentennial of Nelson, which was fascinating.
Gosh, I bet I can remember that. That wasn't an incredibly long time ago. It was lots of fireworks, I seem to remember.
Yeah, 2005. Yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, it was a big project, lots of moving parts, and I think there was the potential to go wrong in lots of areas was very significant. And of course, Mike actually worked on that. And he ran the fleet review. I think he was responsible for the fleet review of the different elements, which went very well. But there was a sort of, it wasn't a reenactment because we had the French and the Spanish there. So it wasn't a reenactment, but it was a sort of some theatre, a bit of drama about maybe what it would look like with fireworks and so on.
So is the French and the Spanish, navies that we've defeated? Was that the kind of?
Well, no, we had to kind of we had to sort of. I remember having to go and see the sort of French naval attaché in Birmingham, in London, and say, no, we're not gloating. We're just all in this together because we're all friends now. So we couldn't be. It was a drama. It was a sort of not a reenactment.
I see. So everything in Portsmouth is designed to stop the French. I'm actually sat in a fort that was designed to stop the French. I mean, we're surrounded by them, aren't we? All around here. So I think Portsmouth was just designed to stop the French, as far as I can tell.
Yeah,
but I could
think
be
you're
wrong.
Probably right. No, I think you're probably right.
I'm no historian. So after doing something like that, what did you do next? Because you've set the bar pretty high in terms of the people you've met and the activities you've been involved in.
No, after that, the Navy decided that I was sort of could be useful, and so asked me if I would stay on and go to Northwood and working the fleet ops room, which I was very happy to. I'd worked in Northwood before, and really was the media person attached to fleet media ops. That was very interesting, because at all times you've got the media team as such were down in Whale Island, but having somebody there reading the signals, seeing things real time for what was happening, going well or not, was interesting. And of course, I spent most of my time on the phone to Whale Island, talking about what we should be doing, and there then talk onwards up to the Ministry of Defence. But it was fascinating. I did a couple of years there, and then decided that actually I'd done long enough, really. I'd done long enough, so I probably should think about doing something a bit different. And I was offered the opportunity to go into the Ministry of Defence as a civil servant, running the media across the whole of the country, all the regional media for all three services. Because there was a feeling in about 2007 that Defence was taking a bit of a hammering in the national media, lots of questions about whether we should be in Afghanistan or not, whether people were properly equipped or not, whether the number of people who were losing their lives or becoming very seriously having life-changing injuries was worth it. So as a result, then the Gordon Brown government decided to try and tilt a bit of focus towards the regional media, who tend to be their angle tends to be supporting their local service personnel, not necessarily asking whether we should be there in the first place, which is obviously a national. So I was brought in to try to make sure that the individual three services were not competing with each other on a day-to-day basis, and that we could work in a more coherent, joined-up fashion. And I did that for 3 years or so, and which was, again, interesting. But, I sort of thought I've probably done defence, really. And so decided I would leave defence, but wanted to do something which is, if one reflected, one had spent all one's life doing some sort of public service. So the idea of, I wasn't that interested in going into some private company and so on. And because a lot of the time when I had first left the Navy, I'd worked for a number of charities, I decided I'd go back into the charity sector.
So tell me about I often hear, this is something I've heard before, the idea of service being in people's DNA, not just in terms of the armed forces, but when they leave, going on to do things that are still supporting communities of one sort or another. Well, yeah, I thought I don't know, I think for me that's really was important to me. So I went to, joined a breast cancer charity as a chief executive, which was, fascinating. And, I'd never been a chief executive before. So it's a big step up, and was a big, it was a big move. And I was there for
8 years and enjoyed it a great deal, actually. And we had that was based in London, but had a number of centres around the UK. And I think probably I got the job because I was used to managing dispersed teams. So that was good. But I didn't want to, breast cancer is the most common female cancer. 1 in 7 women get it. And the life expectancy for people who have breast cancer is very good now. But, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when Estee Lauder started the whole pink ribbon campaign and Pink October and all this, life expectancy really wasn't at the sort of the figures it is now. So I think that particular company had really brought forward people talking about cancer and talking about breast cancer and talking about some of the side effects of the treatments. So that's an example of a woman who made a real difference across the world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you know, but one of our previous interviewees, Bridget, who has suffered with breast cancer, I mean, that was quite a story because it's
nasty.
It's very nasty, isn't it? I mean, as a boy, it's quite easy to make some silly assumptions, if you know what I mean. And I think it's a journey that I wouldn't, certainly don't envy in any stretch of the word.
No, it's nasty. And men get breast cancer too.
Do they?
So many. They do. Men get breast cancer too. Not so many, obviously, but and I think the men that do get breast cancer, there's quite a stigma around that because people don't know that.
No. Well, you've surprised me by telling me that. So, crikey. So that mean that how would that be discovered then? Because there was not all the publicity and the sort of narrative about looking, checking yourself, inspecting yourself.
Yeah,
I've never seen
same
anything.
way. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the same though. I was talking to a guy who had breast cancer, who actually became one of the trustees of the charity, and he just talked about finding a lump on his chest, and he didn't think really much of it because why would he?
Yeah.
And went to the doc, and then was very surprised to find it was breast cancer, and then had a kind of and found it quite difficult to. I mean, I think finding any cancer diagnosis is difficult to deal with, but there was he found there was a stigma around that. And ended up having to give up work because he just couldn't hold it. He was a vicar, and I think being a vicar in a parish is pretty full on. You don't get much in the way of holidays, and people expect you to be available 24/7. And so he ended up leaving his job as a vicar because he couldn't keep it.
Well, you're supporting your parish, your flock, aren't you? And you can imagine there's some pretty challenging circumstances to deal with, and you can't help but, no matter who you are, take on board some of those emotions and challenges. And then if you're dealing with your own, I think there are limits in what people can deal with, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. So anyway, he it's not all sad. He ended up going off and moving to another part of the country, and is now a vicar and an advisor to hospice, a number of hospices, and is, I don't know, what we would probably think of in the military as an adjutant to one of the bishops. So he, in a way, had a job change, but to start with, he obviously had to have sick leave, but then after that, it was too much for him being a parish vicar. So he went off and has now got, I wouldn't say it's a 9-to-5 job, but a more 9-to-5 job.
Well, at least it turned out well for him, and he's still
turned
with
out
us.
well.
That's the important thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think the prognosis for breast cancer patients is very good. There's often been a lot of research, and in fact, the research now is they know. I think if you look at some of the science now, they can see what the cancer cells are doing to the normal cells, so the healthy cells, and I think the fighter cells, which I think are called T cells. All these cells talk to each other, and the scientists can see them talking to each other and know they're talking to each other, and they know how they're talking to each other. But basically, the cancer cells are, I'm putting this very basically, are suggesting to the cells that normally fight them not to fight them. And so in a way, what scientists are doing, they can see all this happening. What they need to do is now just discover the language.
Yeah.
If I was talking to somebody, well, I wouldn't be talking to someone in Polish because I don't understand Polish, or Latvian or whatever. But sooner or later you would pick up a few words.
Yeah.
And so the scientists, that's a real focus at the moment, to learn how these cells are, the language they're speaking to each other. Because once you've cracked the language, presumably you can start to communicate it and turn it around, tell it to do different things.
So we don't think of, the layperson doesn't necessarily think of cancer as an immune response, do we?
Yeah, well, I think no. I mean, I think, something goes wrong in one's cells, that's normal. And most of the time, your own body can fight that. And that's what happens all the time. And that's why 1 in 2 of us will have cancer.
Gosh, that's a high percentage.
So it's a question of, and really what sort of cancer you have really depends where it started. That's how it's, so the most common male cancer is prostate. So there's a lot of learnings that can swap across cancers. I mean, I'm not a scientist, quite obviously, but there's been a huge amount of research in the last 20 years, and a huge amount of, or 30 years, and a huge amount of public interest and public support for charities that are funding research. So one would, and now there are drugs which can target your particular type of cancer with your particular, so it's not quite cracked the language, but they're well on the way. And of course, COVID has taught us that normally, from having discovered the language, say, to being able to provide the injection to you to help you, going through all the clinical trials that have to be gone through, normally will take 10 years or so. But COVID has taught us has taught the world that can happen much quicker. So
do you think that learning will be incorporated into other illnesses and ailments?
I'm sure it will be now. Sure it will be. So I think it's I mean, I think that we will look back in 20 or 30 years and say, actually, that was a turning point in health. We're probably thinking that now, but I mean, I think we will look back in 20 or 30 years' time and think, actually, we learned so much about the health of an individual or the nation or bits of the nation or regions of the nation. And I think that's probably the health challenge going forward.
Medicine's most definitely the cutting edge of technology, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. But actually, when it comes down to it, it might be technology, but it's actually the one-to-one care that you get is what you remember and what your relatives remember.
Absolutely. So you left the breast cancer charity, didn't you? And you're now working, if I've got this right, the British Liver Trust. Yeah.
So I left it's 2.5 years ago. Yeah, over 2.5 years ago, I left the breast cancer charity. I'd done 8 years. It seemed sort of long enough. And I was also working in London. I wanted to, be based at home and work at home. And I live in Hampshire. So I joined British Liver Trust, which is the leading UK liver charity. Liver disease is very nasty. It probably takes a long time. It doesn't have any symptoms, but it's the leading cause of death for men between 39 and 49. So it's the health of one's liver. Liver is the only organ. I didn't know this before I joined. I'm so ignorant. The liver is the only organ that regenerates itself. So you've got one heart, and that's your heart for life, unless you get a transplant. With a liver, your liver is growing and regenerating itself all the time. So if you damage your liver, it should be able to regenerate itself and repair the damage. And there comes a point when the liver is so damaged, if your liver is damaged, that it can't do that anymore. And then it functions on a much smaller portion of itself. And it can continue to do that until, with quite a lot of it not functioning.
Gosh.
And then it falls off a cliff, and then you're very poorly.
So when you say if you damage your liver, how does that happen? What sort of things are we talking about? What does a liver actually do?
Okay, so the liver gets rid of toxins.
Right.
Okay, so it helps digestion, gets rid of toxins. So if you put lots of toxins into your body, the liver has to work harder. So 90% of liver disease is preventable. There are some liver diseases which are inherited, but 90% is preventable. And the main causes of liver disease are sort of a Hep C type situation, or alcohol, or the increasing thing really now is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is what happens to liver is the same, and it becomes hard and crusty, for want of I don't think medics would like that description, but and doesn't function properly. It becomes hard rather than floppy and soft and squidgy. It becomes hard and crusty and doesn't work properly. And it can't work properly, which means that if it's not working properly, you will start on a decline, which is very difficult to reverse. So that often can't be reversed.
That fattiness, sorry, you used a phrase there which has slipped from my mind. What causes that? Is that also down to things like alcohol, or is this something that's new?
It's down to alcohol, but it's also down to cakes and pork pies and everything else that we all eat.
Okay.
So it's as our diet in the Western world has changed over the last 50 years, so has the incidence of liver disease. So it's gone up 400% in the last 30 years.
Wow. So do you often get that sort of comorbidity with diabetes as well? Are they?
Yeah. So if you have diabetes, you are at risk of liver disease.
Okay.
Very much so. And what is kind of, we all know sort of that if you smoke, you are putting your lungs at risk of lung cancer. Everybody knows that. That doesn't mean to say people don't choose not to smoke, but but actually what people don't know is that by eating and drinking to unhealthy levels, you're putting yourself at risk of liver disease and liver cancer. And a third of liver cancers are diagnosed in A&E when it's basically too late to do anything about it. And if you're diagnosed in A&E, you're probably likely to have passed away within 60 days.
So that's with the liver failure that you're in A&E?
Yes. Well, you could be in for any other reason. You could be knocked over by a car or something. You could, for whatever reason, you're in A&E.
Yep.
And so it's shocking that people don't know that. I mean, I didn't know that before. So that doesn't, I'm not saying people should stop drinking and everyone the whole country should go teetotal. But I think it's about keeping to the guidelines, 14 units a week, and giving yourself, rather than drinking one glass of wine, one gin and tonic every evening type of thing, you need to have 3 days, successive days off alcohol in a week, because that gives your liver the opportunity to recharge.
Yeah. Because it regenerates, as you said.
Yeah. Yeah. So it needs the rest.
So it's important to take advantage of the liver's talents, I think, is what you're saying there.
Exactly. So it's, and some liver disease is not nice, and liver cancer is very not nice. No cancer is nice.
What support does the British Liver Trust provide? Is this for individuals, or are you a research funding research organisation, or both?
Yeah, we tend to support individuals. So we have a helpline, which has been, not surprisingly, extraordinarily busy it's always busy, but extraordinarily busy over the COVID period. Our calls have been up 140%. And people who phone us might have had the diagnosis and not know what it means, or a relative of theirs may have had the diagnosis, or they may be going through various treatments and find it very difficult. So we have a nurse helpline. So they speak to liver nurses. We have a team of people in Scotland and also in Wales. We're about to we'd like to have them in London, in the UK, in England, who run support groups for liver patients. And obviously, during COVID, they all went from face to face to virtual, and that's been very successful, actually. And it's very, I think it's very, people find it very supportive to talk to others who've got the same disease as them. I mean, they did in breast cancer, in my experience then. So to talk to people who understand, because they're going through the same, is, I think, very helpful. So we run these support groups. We also are working very hard to increase awareness of the liver and what the liver does. And so we are now, really campaigning to increase early diagnosis, because if you're diagnosed early, you can do something about it.
Yep. You
can say, right, okay, I'm going to not drink alcohol for, I don't know, however long, to give my liver a chance to reboot, or I'm going to change my diet, or I'm going to get fitter, or whatever, or do all three things, in order to give my liver a chance to mend itself, or to regain some of its health. So so it's all about early diagnosis and early detection, and so, because if you don't know something is wrong with you, you can't change any behaviours in order to improve your life chances.
Of course. So you said, if I heard you correctly, you said it's 140% increase during COVID. Is that right? What do you think's caused that? What's driving that?
Well, I think the problem was that people with liver disease couldn't found it difficult to see their GP.
Yeah. Or
because GPs are busy doing lots of other, COVID stuff, or they couldn't see their consultants. And so lots of appointments were cancelled. And they were worried about themselves, because you are very vulnerable if you have liver disease. And so people were very worried, and therefore phoning up a liver nurse who understands about the liver and is able to give you particular liver guidance when you can't get it from anywhere else. So, and everybody was worried during COVID, weren't they?
Well, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I guess the whole backlog that we now face within the NHS is another problem above and beyond all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole early detection. Your cancer survival rates in any cancer are much higher if it's detected early. So I think that's certainly. And liver cancer tends to be detected late. Liver cancer tends to be, if you've had liver disease, you are at risk of having liver cancer. So if you didn't know you had liver disease, you can't do much about it, really.
No. So are we saying that it's primarily a lifestyle that's driving this?
Mm-hmm.
A modern lifestyle, clearly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the whole thing about, they used to be, there's a perception that perhaps the people who have liver disease are people who are maybe homeless or unemployed or on the streets. And there's a kind of stereotypical view. And that may be the case, but it's absolutely not completely the case, because the increased drinking that we've all done during lockdown will not be doing your liver any good at all. So liver disease is not just a disease for people who are have other issues in their lives. It's across all social strata, and it's just not very spoken about much.
No. Well, I have to say, you've taught me a lot. I didn't know any of this. There are people, the celebrities who've passed away. David Bowie had liver cancer, and if I suppose, it maybe had a very glamorous lifestyle in his younger years. I don't know, but I think it's very helpful when celebrities, I think it was very helpful when David Bowie came out and told everybody he got liver cancer. I think that raises the profile of that particular disease. Mm. And he did live a certain lifestyle when he was younger, that's for sure, didn't he?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying there's some, a liver disease can happen to most people, anybody really. You don't have to necessarily be a rock star.
Well, I can assure you that's not me.
No, it's not me either.
So you've talked about a lot there. If you could, after we finish this, if you could send me information, links, we can put that all in the description below the podcast. So if any of our listeners are affected by any of the issues that we've been discussing here, there'll be information below to find out where there's more support. I'm assuming it's all on your website. Yeah,
it is. It's all on the website at British Liver Trust.
Excellent. So I have got, we've talked about you a lot, and I started this off asking for any gossip about Mike. I just want to see if you've got anything, or is it, what happens at sea stays at sea?
Well, I think I'll just keep, I don't think I'm going to give any gossip about Mike, actually. I'm very fond of him. He's a good friend I've known a long time. And I'll just tell him that I didn't share gossip, and therefore, he owes me a glass of wine or something.
Oh, I see. Your discretion has a price.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, Pam, I'd just like to say thank you so much for coming on. I've learnt an awful lot. And as I say to any of our listeners that may be suffering any of these issues, please do get in touch with the British Liver Trust.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed speaking to you, Steve.
So, Mike, she's an interesting lady, and as you heard, I didn't really get much out of her about you, unfortunately.
Yeah, she's very loyal. I mean, what a cheek asking her on the podcast to come up with any gossip on me so you could get some leverage. I mean, what a cheek you've got.
Well, you weren't there to stop me, so, whilst the cat's away.
Well, perhaps I can get back at you during this commentary. Anyway, I absolutely agree. I've known, as she said, I've known Pamela for a very long time. Back up when she was a WREN officer up in Scotland doing secret squirrel things with communications. And we became friends then, and we've been friends ever since. And although she only spent 5 years in the regular Navy, she actually contributed a huge lot to the reserves. I think she's the epitome of what a good reserves officer is all about, doing it both part-time and full-time. And I think over the course of 30 years added a huge amount of value and worth to the service through her reserve service.
I don't think there's any doubt about it. 24 years by my maths.
Yes, your maths is probably better than mine in that case, but for once. But I loved There were a couple of bits I didn't know about her, which is what I think some of the magic of these podcasts is, that actually you lift the lid on people and learn things that you didn't know about, not just about the subject they talk about, but about them as people. And she was talking about growing up in the Midlands and about as far away from the sea, but she thought the Royal Navy was glamorous as a career. She obviously hadn't met me at this stage, but was advised to go to university first, which she did. And then one of her friends said, "You're a bit too crazy to join the Navy." And I would agree that there is a little bit of crazy about her, but it's a lovely crazy, and everyone loves her for it. And it's called Personality and Charisma, which came out through the podcast, I thought.
I think there's a little bit of crazy in everybody who joins the armed forces, as far as I can work out.
What are you saying, Steve? What are you saying?
Nothing. It's not my place to say anymore.
Anyway, it was an interesting trot through her career and the reasons why she left. She's absolutely right. Until relatively recently, you weren't allowed to have children and stay in the Navy. So if you became pregnant, that was effectively an honourable discharge as opposed to a dishonourable discharge. But these days, we cater much better for women who have children, and there are plenty of women at sea at the moment who do have children who are being looked after by spouses, husbands, partners, possibly parents, grandparents, and it works because the service has adapted to modern leave. And even in a service where you're deployed for weeks and months on end, it still works.
So you can stay in as long as the skirt fits, the keeper of the skirts. It's almost Harry Potter-esque. I think we might make this company maker's policy.
I must admit, if I'd had to wear a skirt, I wouldn't have stayed in the Navy that long. But I think on that point, we probably ought to move on. Interestingly, I think you raised vigil, or did she raise vigil? But one of you did, and you know my thoughts on it. But actually, I entirely agree with her. You view it as a TV drama, not as a program about submarines, because if you listed everything that was wrong of it in terms of an accurate portrayal of submarine life, we'd be here all day. But as a crime TV drama, which is what it was entertaining, and it did actually shine a spotlight on an area of the armed forces that very, very few people know anything about. Absolutely,
and with good reason, of course.
So she leaves the Navy and she goes into reserves, and almost the first thing she does, is to deal with the Lockerbie air crash. And I didn't know this. I thought it was always thought that it was a terrorist incident right from the word, because we hear what we hear from the news. But actually, she said that when she attended the briefing where they actually then disclosed there was a bomb on board for the first time, that was quite a shocking piece of information that came out. And interesting how she got involved in that, and how that was almost the first thing she did after she left the full-time Navy.
I guess, yeah, it's because the idea of a bomb is just unthinkable, isn't it? On an airline, well, on any plane.
Yeah, I might have told you that I was fortunate enough to be serving in the US, but unfortunate during 9/11. That was a hugely eye-opening experience for me and everyone around me. But I think the thing about this is actually what she really did well was expose the variety of what the reserves do for the regular armed forces. So we have the regular forces, Army, Air Force, Navy, and then on top of that we have the reserves, which both complement and supplement the regulars. So they do jobs that the regulars don't do. They are specialists in some areas, and they also add breadth and depth to what we do to give us extra capacity and capability. So they're an incredibly unsung part of the armed forces, but they do a really important job. And so shout out to all reserves listening. Keep it up. You're doing a fantastic job. We all need you. And I think Pam's story about what she did in the reserves was really illuminating.
I quite agree. If you remember, JJ was in the reserves before he was deployed to Afghanistan. Tip Cullen left the Royal Marines and then joined the Royal Marine Reserves. So, it's a common feature, isn't it, of some of the people we've spoken to?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that she also talked about when she then eventually said, I've done with defence, I'm going to move into the charitable sector, and she's now been CEO of 2 charities. There's almost a continuity there in terms of service or commitment or duty or whatever you want to call it. And so her DNA and many service men and women's DNA is actually that's kind of who they are and why they do what they do.
Absolutely, and it gives people purpose, doesn't it? Which is a word we've used before.
Yeah, there were 2 bits of a reserve service that I thought were really. It just shows you what a very varied career she had. But she was talking about, orchestrating a James Bond premiere at one point, and the red carpet, and First Sea Lords trying to get out of cars and pretending not to notice. That, by the way, is what they call the I see no ships, the Nelsonian I see no ships. They pretended not to notice, so they wouldn't have to do something, which I thought was really good. And then she talked about the bicentenary of the Battle of Trafalgar, or T200 as it was colloquially known in the Navy. And she and I worked on that together. We both, she ran all the media, and as she said, I got involved with the International Fleet Review, which wasn't a small affair. What she didn't tell you was that she got awarded an OBE for the work she did on T200. So she was quite self-deprecating on that, but she did well.
Didn't you get an OBE for your work on the Fleet Review?
I was hoping you weren't going to mention that, actually. Both of us did, but that wasn't the point of me saying that, by the way.
I am absolutely sure that's the case, but well done nonetheless.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, so there was another thing that she mentioned about the films that they used to have. So when you're at sea, especially in the early days when there was no internet, there was no connectivity, entertainment on board was homemade. So, when you were off watch and relaxing, if you wanted to watch a film, then the Navy didn't provide it. There was a charity that provided the films. In the really early days, there used to be 16mm projectors. Film, not digital, film. And it was always the job of the junior officer to A, select the movies for a trip, for a patrol, for a mission, and B, then when it was movie night, to show them on the 16mm projector. It was always the junior officer because he could get, or she could get, but he could get blamed if they were poor films. I think I got more negatives from my choice of films than anything else I ever did in the Navy. And also,
hold on. What did you choose? Are there some film classics there? Is there?
Oh, I have to scratch my head on that one. And
Gone with the Wind?
No. There were silly movies like the Pirate movie, or Flashdance was a big favourite. I don't know why. ABBA the movie. The Blues Brothers we probably watched that so many times, and Top Gun. We probably watched those so many times that the actual physical film wore out. The sprockets that wore out. But it was always entertaining watching the junior officer, once wasn't you, actually operating the film, the projector, because the requirement was that you had to load the next reel on, because they're usually 3 reels of film for a movie, and feed it through before the old reel had finished. So just think about that. It's called a rolling reel change, and it's a real skill, and not everybody, including me, got it right.
That sounds actually quite hard.
It needed a lot of practice, and the ship or submarine not moving around a bit as well.
Was there a forfeit?
Always, but I'm not prepared to disclose what those were. Anyway, we slightly got off the track talking about what Pammy's been up to, and of course, half of the interview was about what she did after she left defence. And she talked about her 8 years at the Haven, and that I thought that tied in really well. You mentioned it with Bridget's experiences, and Pammy did a lot of good there. That the charity, when she took it over, was not faring well, and she turned it round, and it was a very vibrant charity when she left it. And the last 2 years, she's now been running the British Liver Trust, and there's a few things to worry us there, weren't there? 14 units of alcohol, needing to have 3 days in a row without touching alcohol. How does that grab you?
Well, if you'd have asked me this maybe 10 years ago, I would have been in denial. But these days, I'm okay with that.
Isn't denial in Egypt?
It could be. Is that another Nelsonian?
No, it's just what my boys would call a dad joke. In other ones that only I find funny. But anyway, there you go. The Liver Trust, and I think there's an awful lot about that. But you didn't know what the liver did. That was another thing I wrote down. You said, so what does the liver actually do? You've got one, you know.
Well, I hope so, given the conversation I had this morning. But you don't know what every single part of your body does, do you? Or do you? Do you need that to be a captain of a submarine?
Probably not. But there's Bill Bryson's written a very good book called The Body, which I recommend to anyone. It's both funny and educational in equal measure. So if you do want to learn what the liver does and everything else, I mean, there's plenty of other resources apart from Bill Bryson, but it's a very funny way of learning out. No, so actually I thought some really, and she talked about the impact of COVID. Of course, we all know that one of the impacts of COVID has been that NHS waiting lists for other diseases have dramatically increased because people just haven't been able to visit hospitals or their GPs. And she talked about 140% increase in referrals to her call centre in terms of people asking for advice because obviously the NHS was overwhelmed with everything else that was going on.
And that's just one charity, Mike. And there's going to be other charities that, in other areas of health. So that's quite a challenge, isn't it?
Well, I think that's true of the charity that's supporting us in this venture, the Royal Navy Royal Marines charity. I think they've seen an uptake in people seeking support, which is one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast, isn't it?
It is indeed.
So big shout out to them as well as British Liver Trust as well. So I think fascinating episode, actually. And although of all your guests, she's one of the ones I probably knew better, actually I still learnt things about her, and I think so will your listeners.
Yes, she was. It was very interesting, and like I said, I've learned an awful lot about the liver, but also more seriously the impact of lifestyle upon health. It's an important issue, isn't it?
Really is. And importantly, perhaps most importantly, she didn't spill the beans on any gossip.
I try every single time. If I get a heads up that you know these people, I try. They're too loyal.
Well, all your friends say you're very trying.
I don't have any friends, Mike.
I'm sure that's not true. Get out the violin.
just a sympathy vote. Anyway, I will get some dirt one day.
Well, keep digging. Brilliant episode anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thanks for listening. The Royal Navy and Royal Marines charity exists to support sailors, Marines and their families for life. If you or someone you know could do with some support, give them a call on 023 93 87 1568 or drop them an email on support@rnrmc.org.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please subscribe.